Ring that bell. Let's start the show. Do you see how I did a hybrid intro of our Tuesday and Thursday show? Welcome to Wrestling Chat with Friends, the Random Wednesday show. Why not? I'm the DJ Collector. I'm here with Dom equals Money in the Bank TG, my tag team partner. TG, defend it. Give me a reason in 1 minute or less. Tell me why Dom should win Money in the Bank.
Well, I think, as I said last time, I'd like to see just how hot heel heat can get.
Can it get hotter?
Yeah, it can get hotter.
I mean,
Theoretically.
to the point of what people throw stuff in the ring, that hasn't happened yet. But short of
Has,
that,
has
it's
happened in
it's
this.
as loud as
Yeah,
any heel reaction. They are drowning him out.
yeah,
When that mic is handed to him, it's the loudest boos on television of any sports entertainment / wrestling program.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty special, and I'd like to see. I mean, I think we'll get into it, but I think there are other directions they could go that would still be, I think, creatively effective. So it doesn't have to be him, but I'm fantasy booking that.
He's an ex-con. He can get himself into any title situation at any time. He's proven that he has he's lived that life and he knows what to do. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Welcome to the Wednesday show. Thanks for joining us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter at WCWF Pod. We're here mostly every week. It's going to be a busy summer, but we're here with us tonight. We're talking wrestling. We're talking WWE. Happy to have you out there. Thank you for the privilege of your time. So let's just kind of ride with it. Actually, we're not. We need to take this break first because, like I said, we're going to start the show on kind of a down note because today is a very sad day in the wrestling world. As everyone knows, or if you don't know, I'm breaking it to you right now. I don't know his full name, but he's only known by 3 words. The Iron Sheik sadly passed away today at age 81. Hadn't been active for years, and it's sort of, he appeared on a couple of the Raw milestone programs. He really has, the last few years, he's been famous for having an unbelievable Twitter account that, unfortunately, not run by him, run by 2 handlers who speak for him, but every tweet that came from that Iron Sheik account, you could just hear it in his voice. You could picture him saying it. You almost couldn't distinguish that it wasn't him doing it. One of the top bad guys of the WWF ever, him and Roddy Piper, maybe. There were a few others, Big John Studd, Sheik's partner, Nikolai Volkov. But the Sheik, man, famous for being the man who lost to Hulk Hogan to start Hulkamania. TG, we're not going to spend too much time on it, but give me some thoughts on the Iron Sheik and his legacy and impact in the wrestling business.
I think a really interesting life. I think in terms of his impact in the wrestling business, obviously he was, to be a WWF champion puts him in a very elite group, especially during
who did
that
he defeat?
era.
Bob Backlund?
Bob Backlund. He ended Backlund's last title run. And so I think that, certainly his place in the business is noteworthy. And then, as you said, he sort of had this second life in terms of pop culture relevance because of his Twitter feed and other stuff that happened over the last several years. I think the thing that jumps out at me is just how interesting his life was, because he was a guy who was, he was born in Iran. He was a Greco-Roman wrestler.
There's always been some things about him that you never knew were fact or fiction. Like this, did he compete in the Olympics? Was he on the Olympic team?
Yeah,
which he did. I guess was on the team. Did he compete too in Olympics in 72?
I don't know about 72. 68 was when he was
Mexico City.
Yeah, so he and I know that he was in the United States. I think he was national after he immigrated. I think he was a national AAU Greco-Roman champion. Like
Minnesota, is that where he was based out of? I think early on, he started in the AWA, I believe, in Verganyas.
That I'm not. That sounds right. I'm not sure, but I think that's correct. But again, I think that just he's one of those guys, as the WWF really was becoming the dominant wrestling brand in the world, but certainly during the national expansion, he was one of those colorful characters who was most strongly associated with that company and with it blossoming into this national and then international powerhouse. And I think that, you know, if you think about the guys who were, for example, uh, immortalized in the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling cartoon in
He
the
was one of them.
80s.
Yeah, along with
He was,
Hillbilly Jim,
yeah,
Junkyard Dog, Sheik and Nikolai.
yep,
Absolutely. And he was versatile too because he was from Iran, which has had tensions with the USA for over 40 years. You could always have him in a feud where you get that crowd chanting USA. You can put him with Jim Duggan, Hulk Hogan, anyone with a pro USA slate. Whenever they wanted to lean into patriotism, the Sheik in the 80s and 90s, and there were lots of opportunities, was always the one there. He did turn Sergeant Slaughter for a time in the early 90s, didn't? Or he was a henchman for Slaughter when Slaughter had turned.
Yeah, which was always a weird thing to me. So they rebranded him as Colonel Mustafa.
That's right.
When they did all that stuff, but at the same time, they would acknowledge that they would refer to his past success as the Iron Sheik, but they wouldn't call him the Iron Sheik. It was a strange thing, but it was also a weird time in wrestling where kayfabe was, I think, slowly but surely on the way out, but it was still kind of here. So they were kind of had a foot on either side of that line. Anyway, certainly, a guy who WWF Hall of Famer,
gave one of the greatest Hall of Fame speeches in history. If
Yeah.
you haven't seen it, go back and watch it on YouTube. His speech, there's probably not that many that were better than that. Also, if you go to YouTube and search Gene Okerlund bloopers, there's some great outtakes with a couple of Sheik interviews that are just absolutely amazing.
And I think if I remember correctly, he's repeated the story, of course, more than once, but I think during that Hall of Fame speech, he tells the story that he allegedly was offered $400,000 or something by Vern Gagne, supposedly to shoot on Hulk Hogan during their title match, and he of course refused to do that. But that's always been kind of an interesting bit of possibly true, possibly exaggerated, possibly not true wrestling lore, was that Vern Gagne, who of course was upset about Vince McMahon taking all of his top talent, including Hulk Hogan, was like, I'm gonna, put a stop to this and throw a wrench into the works for the WWF by derailing Hulk Hogan before he really gets off the ground up there. And he, as you said, had ties to the Iron Sheik and made him this offer, and the Iron Sheik was like, I'm not doing that. So
someone's going to have to tell me, because Hulk Hogan blocks me on Twitter, whether Hogan acknowledges Sheik's passing or not. Hulk Hogan was always the foil to Sheik recently too. Anytime Sheik wanted to kind of go off on something, it always inevitably end with some bash on Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I checked earlier because I was curious about that too. As of I don't know, an hour or two ago when I looked, he had not posted anything, but he also Hogan is not as active on Twitter as he once was. It's been a few days since he's posted anything, so it wasn't I don't think a slight to the Sheik that he hasn't posted yet.
Once he blocked me and couldn't see any of my content, why stay on Twitter? So that's a good point. But above his wrestling legacy, he was a husband, a family man. He had a daughter who was murdered tragically. So, and he had his own issues. So, a tough life, a long life. 81. Everyone in the wrestling world is mourning today. Here's my question: Monday on Raw or this Friday on SmackDown, does he get just a picture and then memoriam? Does he get a 10 bell salute? Does he get a video package? Does the entire roster come out on the podium, out from the behind the curtain?
I don't think the entire roster comes out. I think that has typically been reserved for people who had either untimely deaths or people who were still currently affiliated with the company in some way.
Yeah.
Certainly he gets some kind of tribute. My guess would be an opening graphic And
Mm-hmm.
then at some point during the show, I think they probably have a video package that Michael Cole will kick it to
Yep.
during the show.
There's too many good clips of Iron Sheik not to put together some 2-minute video package. So, Sheiky baby, we send it up to you. Wrestling Chat with Friends. You will always be one of our friends, a top friend. And, I'm sure St. Peter is in the camel clutch right now. So, yeah, there we go. All right, let's get to the business at hand. We are streaking toward July 1st. Is that what that is? That's where we're going to have Money in the Bank. There are qualifying matches everywhere. If I was to read tea leaves right now, we don't even have the entire rosters filled out for the men, at least. But, a lot of fans are fantasy booking LA Knight to win this. The way, without some guys like Cody Rhodes, has Dom Mysterio been announced for this? He's not even in the tournament, is he? No. With some of these other guys out, you look at who's who can predict maybe who will end up in there. LA Knight seems to have some momentum on his side. Like when we talked about Montez Ford before we knew the matchups, Montez Ford's a guy that if you wanted to break him out as a single star, Money in the Bank would be a way to do it. But LA Knight is getting some traction. He's got the support. He's totally over. The fans would love it. But seemingly even online and maybe even with his appearance on Friday, he's also on SmackDown, which I think this briefcase will be the winner of this briefcase. I'm predicting will probably try to challenge Roman at some point because you're going to need people for Roman. We've talked about that. Sounds like they're planning on keeping the belt on him for the foreseeable future. So he's going to work through the Usos, him and Solo. That's going to happen. He may even Solo is probably a ways down the road to feud with him, but you got to have SmackDown guys to feud with Roman at some point, late summer, fall, maybe after SummerSlam. Any of those times will be someone that they could definitely put LA Knight in the program in the fall. Is there anyone else you'd like to see over him, or is he your top guy too, as he is mine?
Couple things. I think first of all, there is a type of character that I think makes for a better Money in the Bank winner. And it doesn't necessarily have to be heel. And I think LA Knight has naturally gotten over as a face, even though he's been presented as a heel.
Mm-hmm.
But what LA Knight does have is the nature of his character, I think, has, whether you call it heelish tendencies or whatever the personality traits are, that would make him a good Money in the Bank holder. So what that really means is somebody who the crowd would react strongly to if they can cash in at any given moment. So again, that's to go back to the Dom Mysterio example. As a guy who's a super over heel, who gets heat just from even having a microphone in the vicinity of his mouth, having that briefcase and teasing cash-ins and stuff, it's just a heat magnet. Same thing with, I think, LA Knight from the standpoint of, as a character, he would be the kind of guy who would do like an impromptu cash-in, but also the crowd is so organically into him and reacts to him so strongly just from him appearing in a positive way that I think he's a really good candidate to win. I think the one thing that I would probably disagree with is if he wins the briefcase, I think he's more likely to go to challenge whoever the world heavyweight champion is at the time, Seth or whoever else. And the reason is it's not anything to do with Roman or whatever specifically, other than that storyline is so intricate and has so many additional cards left to play. I think it would be much tougher to integrate a Money in the Bank holder who has never had anything to do with anybody in the bloodline into that storyline in a way that kind of makes sense versus just having that person be like a vague threat to Seth. Now, having said that, I do think what you'll see, I think ultimately the cash in would be on the Raw champion. I do think you'll see that Money in the Bank holder, if it is LA Knight, he will tease cash ins, on Roman or whatever. I just don't think it'll ultimately happen. And the other reason is just a practical one, which you alluded to a minute ago. I don't think anyone at this point believes that Roman Reigns is going to lose the title in any scenario other than a high profile pay-per-view main event. And so if you have, LA Knight coming out on like a random SmackDown and teasing a cash in, I don't think you'll get a pop, of course, but I don't think people are going to be like, well, maybe tonight's the night that Roman loses it after, 1,200 days or whatever it is at that point. LA Knight would be a great choice. I think what's going to be really interesting to me is to see how they fill out the other half of the men's match. We have 3 that are locked in: Ricochet, Shinsuke Nakamura, and of course LA Knight. And I think figuring out how we get to the other 3 is going to be part of that, because as I've said, I think the final spot will be some kind of battle royal or whatever, with a bunch of different guys in it. And that is where potentially you could see someone like a Dominic Mysterio come out of nowhere to take claim that last spot.
Just sort of thinking about some of the segments on Raw Monday, they did not that he's necessarily been gone for a while, but they did this vignette with Johnny Gargano. Everyone's calling the underdog. That's a vignette you play when someone's been gone for 2 months or they're repackaging somebody. He feels like someone who could, you talked about Montez Ford, not having him in it because you can count on some high flying moves and really exciting moves. We have Ricochet. Gargano is the type of guy who could add that sort of excitement to a Money in the Bank just with his ability. While I'm sort of thinking as I'm talking about this, there also could be sort of having that vignette because they very well may be ready to reintroduce Tommaso Ciampa to the main roster, just to remind everybody that Gargano is there because those two are just never linked to each other. Ciampa, being in some, getting his way into that, not as a winner, but they're going to have to reintroduce him somehow. And I think they're high. I think they want to be high on Ciampa because of his success in NXT. So having him back as something high profile, but I just thought it was odd that, Gargano was somebody who could fill it out nicely, but, thinking about someone who's a real threat to win doesn't quite feel it way. How about on the women's side? Should anyone win it other than Becky, or is it sort of Becky's to lose just because of the way the story is being written about her?
I don't think Becky will win. I think, number one, because her business with Trish seems unfinished, and number two, because again, I think it's not that you can't have sort of a strong face to win. I just think it makes one of the things that makes the Money in the Bank so interesting and entertaining from a storytelling perspective is the unpredictability of it. And I think, again, like when John Cena was the Money in the Bank holder, he's the guy who's going to say, like, 1 week from tonight, I'm going to challenge you for that. It's like, that's all fine, but it's not as fun as champions hurt. Are we going to hear the music of the Money in the Bank holder, like, just, out of nowhere? So again, Becky's obviously got a little bit of an edge to her. So it's not like if Cody, this was what we talked about last time. Like, the reason Cody Rhodes would be a bad Money in the Bank winner is because he would be the guy who'd be like, he'd come out on Raw and do his usual 5-minute soliloquy and then say, at the next pay-per-view in 3.5 weeks, I'm going to challenge. It's like, oh God, okay. That's not interesting. Becky wouldn't be quite that, but I think because she is a little bit more in that direction and has unfinished business with Trish, I think it's unlikely. I think you're more likely to see sort of either a heel win on the women's side or like an underdog type face. So like,
does it matter that 2 heels are currently holding the women's title that you want to give it to a face, or that doesn't have to be part of it?
So I think it's a great question. I don't think it matters that much, just because as we have seen, sometimes that Money in the Bank holder will hold on to the briefcase for months. And so even though you're absolutely right, there are 2 heel champions right now, it's not necessarily the case that's going to be the situation when the winner elects to cash in. So to give you an example, WWE defiantly and obstinately continues to present Charlotte Flair as a face. So at some point, Charlotte Flair is going to come back, and she's probably going to win a title pretty quickly because she tends to do that.
Yep.
And then you'll have a face, theoretical face, as champion, maybe 3 months from now or whatever. In which case you're fine with a heel winning Money in the Bank. So I think like just looking at who's in the match now, though, on the women's side, I wouldn't predict that she's going to win, but someone like Zelina Vega would fit the bill of sort of that underdog face, who's like, someone who hasn't been a singles champion, who is small on the smaller side, has been presented as like a feisty underdog. She could fit that role. My guess is, though, that I don't think we have, of the 3 women who are currently in the match, I think
Yep.
it is more likely than not that the winner of the briefcase will not come from that group of 3. On the men's side, LA Knight, I think, is certainly a top contender.
Yeah. So over the next few weeks, they're going to have more qualifying matches. They'll fill it out, and that's going to sort of be the primary, the co-headline story going to this pay-per-view, along with, of course, the Usos and Roman and Solo, which sort of hasn't quite played itself out yet, but likely will on Friday. I want to switch topics because we have a unique position being here on a Wednesday. I want to talk about what happened last night on NXT.
Okay.
We don't talk about it often. It's okay if you didn't see it, but I'm sure you know about it.
Vague awareness. That's my level of engagement on NXT, but continue.
2 very established main roster veterans have shown up on NXT yesterday. Mm-hmm. Mustafa Ali showed up, assisted Tyler Bate, or got involved in the Tyler Bate story. I didn't really even see it, so I just sort of had to. And then Baron Corbin has now inserted himself into the world title picture. And it seems as though he'll challenge Carmelo Hayes at the next NXT PLE, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
So that tells me a couple of things. First, it tells me that Braun Breaker is probably headed to the main roster, since he's sort of concluded his.
Well, did you see what happened at the end of NXT?
He kind of called out Seth Rollins too, didn't he? Yeah. So all those signs are there that Braun is finally, we thought it might happen at WrestleMania. We thought it might happen at the Royal Rumble. Still hadn't happened. Now it looks like it might actually happen. That Braun, who doesn't really need to do much else in NXT, time for him to move up. I'm going to say I like this because, outside of someone like Dolph Ziggler, Baron Corbin and Mustafa Ali are like 2 of your workhorses. They've been there for a long time. There's, the heads, Triple H, whoever it is now, I'm sure has complete trust and faith in them. Everyone in the locker room probably loves and respects those guys because they're great. Those guys are just great workers. But they're not having a ton of success on the main roster lately, somewhat probably by design, and somewhat just because they may just be the ceiling that they can hit with fans. I mean, they have tried everything with Mustafa Ali. They had him leading a faction a couple of years ago that could have been a great invasion angle, but just didn't work for whatever reason. Corbin, last man to pin Roman Reigns. He's got good pedigree, multiple-time champion over the secondary titles. Ali just won a Battle Royal and challenged for the Intercontinental title. Didn't get that. Here's why I like it. You have 2 very trusted workers who could go down there and evaluate talent. The people they're working with, kind of Carmelo Hayes, Tyler Bate, guys who kind of could be main roster ready. Maybe go down there, work with some guys who have been on the roster for a long time. These are main roster veterans. Give these guys who are on the cusp a taste of what main roster talent looks and feels like, and then get feedback from those 2 guys as to do you think these guys are ready? And I think it also just is a great way to showcase 2 guys who are good on television, but it's just a crowded field right now. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is what's happening sort of in a meta way is that it's clear the way that they are using NXT has shifted, I think, for the better. And to your point, there's a lot of things that you can do with it that are going to be mutually beneficial to the people that you're bringing down, as well as the people who are there now and get to work with seasoned pros.
Mm-hmm.
And they initially were doing this with, again, like, I don't want to call it stunt casting, to use a term from other forms of entertainment, but they would bring the New Day came down for a bit and held the NXT tag team titles. Dolph Ziggler came down and shockingly won the NXT championship and held it briefly. Now I think that they've shifted more to the kind of the next evolutionary phase of this, which is taking guys who are certainly, established in the ring, have, like you said, have a track record of several years, but maybe whatever they're doing on the main roster either isn't quite working from a character perspective or has kind of reached a natural stopping point. So, like with Mustafa Ali, he briefly sort of had a character that had shades of Bo Dallas, sort of a positivity, but also was kind of tongue in cheek. And then, kind of when they were getting ready to go to Saudi Arabia, kind of abruptly shifted to be this number one contender. Had a really good match with Gunther in Saudi Arabia, but that was clearly sort of a build that was always going to end with that show in Saudi Arabia. And then it's like, okay, what do we do with him next? And now they found something that I think is both interesting and also constructive for him and for whoever gets to wrestle him down there. And you've also seen it, like another example. It's like Dana Brooke, who has really been treading water at best for a while. She goes down to NXT and now can get kind of refreshed. So I think that this is, again, another Triple H innovation that is a new tool in the WWE toolbox. It's like, hey, we have this third brand. Let's use it, not just as like this sort of developmental territory that's sequestered off, but something where we can enhance both NXT and enhance people who maybe are hitting a wall or not excelling as they could on the main roster. So I think it's a really positive development. And I think that we got a taste of this in a different way a couple of years ago when Triple H was in NXT 1.0, when he really was trying to build up NXT almost as not quite co-equal with Raw and SmackDown, but certainly in the same category. Famously, there was that Survivor Series where they had brand warfare and NXT won. Mm-hmm. And then it was that, and this is my opinion, I think that was probably a bridge too far because it clearly more resources are being devoted to these other two shows. You don't want to kind of muddy that water. But right. The point is that I think that what they're doing now strikes the right balance where you do sort of put them on situationally put them on a level playing field with the big two. At the same time, you are building the next generation of superstars. We've talked about this in the past, but I think that WWE right now is sort of in a phase, and not just because of what's happening sort of behind the scenes with the merger and whatever, but also they're in a phase where they look at the roster and they see, okay, we love Edge, but he's coming to the end of his run. We love Rey Mysterio, but he's coming to the end of his run, et cetera, et cetera. Roman is in a class by himself now, but 3 years from now, we're going to need the next group of folks to replace the Randy Ortons, the Edges, the Rey Mysterios, the AJ Styles, guys like that. And so I think that is one of the driving forces behind this shift is to really see what you've got, enhance them so that they're ready, their main roster ready, and can sort of move into that main event role in the next 24 to 36 months, along with some people you already have on the roster, like Austin Theory, Montez Ford, and people like that.
Yeah. And, a couple of names who are down there that you can see, you don't even want to speculate because if you had asked this, 2.5 years ago, Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano are going to be the next Seth Rollins and, they're going to be the next top guys. They've both had runs, probably a mix of haven't been used right or just it was just sort of an NXT thing, but they haven't necessarily gone over. So you don't want to say, oh, well, there's JD McDonough, there's Von Wagner, then there's two guys whose names I can barely pronounce. Who are the two guys who are feuding who have the names Dijak, what's his name?
Dijak.
Dijak.
If you're asking me for NXT names, it's a
And
crapshoot.
and then there's
I'm
Dragunov, Ilya Dragunov.
Ilya
Is that
Dragunov.
yeah? Okay, so yeah, there's those two guys.
Him, I know.
They look like they have all the goods, but you just never know because
Yeah.
there's some can't miss guys you think in NXT that haven't made much of a dent. But
Yeah.
yeah, clearly you're right. In the next 3 or 4 years, we'll just say 5 years from now, there's a good sized group of guys who are probably not going to be around still, and that includes your Orton, your Edge, your Mysterios, your perhaps even your stock. Yeah, I mean, and Roman may be off doing something else in 5 years. So yeah,
Right.
it's going to be. Who knows? I wonder. Do you think? I mean, we're going way off course here. Do you think Tony Khan's playing some like long game, or he's like waiting that out, or what? Just because I mean, they will have that problem. They're going to have some big losses the next few years. I'm not trying to say that it's part of a strategy, but
Do
how
you
do
mean
you
waiting it out, like waiting for certain
just
older WWE guys to be available?
no, like waiting for a drop off, where the talent suddenly and the
Oh,
product suddenly becomes not nearly as fascinating when the guys who have been the last 12, 15 years carrying it
I
aren't there.
mean, I think he probably is not, but if he is, it's a big mistake because I think that if we know anything about WWE, it's this: they are incredibly resilient creatively. Meaning, there certainly are lulls where it's like, man, the shows just aren't very good right now. And the next thing you know, before you know it's a year later, and they have something like the Bloodline storyline, which is as
Right.
good of a long term story as I've ever seen. And it's like, wow, how did they figure this out? And what's most interesting to me about WWE, just kind of like the ebbs and flows of WWE over the years, is sometimes it will be a situation where there is a talent who is just ascendant, and it's like, oh, this person is a big star, or like a switch flips, like happened with, for example, Becky Lynch, where she was, obviously very solid in NXT. She gets called up, she's very solid, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you capture something here, and you're able to take it to the next level. And sometimes though, and this is what I think about Roman Reigns, like Roman Reigns is such an interesting case study for building a star in WWE, because that is a guy who years and years ago, Vince and Dusty were like, he's going to be the guy.
Hell or high water, we're going to make him the guy.
He is going to be the guy. And for a long time, it didn't work. And then it worked like as well as just about anybody has ever worked before. And there's definitely a sort of a best practices for like, here are the things we need to do to give ourselves the best chance to succeed. But it's not an exact science. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the timing of when it works is unpredictable. And so, so to go back to the question about Tony Khan, you can't ever assume that there's going to be a long-term lull, and you just have to wait and strike when the iron is hot and when there is. And in fairness, when AEW launched, I think the timing of that made a lot of sense, because that was a time when I do think that it was, again, Roman was not really clicking, certainly not the way he was. I mean, he was a great superstar, but he wasn't
multi-time champion and everything. But
right.
But he was force-fed for the previous
Correct.
couple of years. Right.
Correct. In the same way that there was a portion of John Cena's career where people were like, we don't want this, and you keep giving him to us, and he wins all the time. We don't want this. Obviously not exactly the same, but similar sort of thing. And I think that was a situation where when AEW launched, it had been not only a long time since there had been a viable second national brand, but also there was a legitimate hunger from wrestling fans for something that was, in terms of the presentation and the style, was something different. And it wasn't even a situation where it's like, AEW was like, we are committing to a specific style. A lot of it was just like, the style was not WWE. So you had some indie stuff that you would never see in WWE. you had
Yep.
some, former stars, you had like, it was a good mix. And I think the timing when they started was really made a lot of sense. But you can't like if you're waiting for WWE to like self-destruct, like you're going to go to your grave waiting for that. I mean, they're too big, too much money, especially now. I mean,
Especially now. Right.
whatever is going to happen to them, like they have enough money at this point to survive for a decade of like a downturn in the
Yeah.
business
And
and
especially
keep
the way
going.
things have gone the last couple of years. It's not like Vince is still hanging on to it and is making all the decisions. They've seen what someone other than Vince can do. So
Right.
that's taken some of the scare away of, oh, what if we lose Vince? Because Vince will not be involved 5 years from now either, probably.
Yeah.
Because he'll just be in his 80s and likely just not able to do it. So yes, it's not going to take this dive off the cliff. They've seemingly they know what they have with Triple H. Triple H seems just fine. They're going to be replacing someone like whoever else is back there. Pritchard's still back there, but Triple H has, I'm sure, a loyal and dedicated team that's going to fit in. But wrestling has
This is just a random thought. You know what I'm
here.
surprised that we haven't seen? I'm
Hmm.
surprised we haven't seen William Regal on TV yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Because it was such a big deal that they like really wanted to get him. Triple H really wanted to get him back. They worked out a deal with AEW. They got him back. And I don't know if like as part of the deal, they were like, okay, but he can't be on TV for 6 months or
I bet
something.
I was gonna say I bet is part of the exit deal that they negotiated that, hey, we're letting you go, but the bone they're throwing AEW is he won't be an on-screen character maybe until the duration of some contract time. That would make the most sense
Yeah.
because as he proved up until the day he walked out the door in AEW, he's still gold on television.
Yeah, and he, I mean, if I remember obviously it's been a few months now, but if I remember the details correctly, the natural expiration of his contract, if he had just waited everything out till his contract actually expired and like everything had just proceeded normally, he would have like the non-compete stuff would have expired by now. Like he would have been able to go on TV. The fact that they got him earlier, I think you're right. I think they probably were like, okay, the concession is he can't be an on-screen character until after SummerSlam or whatever.
Especially because he was an on-screen character on the day he left.
Intricately involved, which is why I was so surprised that
a primary like player,
yeah,
So
like
it sort of
directly
has to
involved
be
in the
that.
main storyline that the company was doing at the time, which that whole thing was kind of odd, but anyway.
It's got to be that. What I don't know, and I don't know if he took some. There's his title is vice president something. Is he Triple H's Pritchard, or do you see that as maybe what it's going to be? Like Vince had Pritchard.
Yeah,
For a while it looked like Shawn Michaels was going to be that guy for a while. Then he was given NXT. I mean, I am certainly curious. Like haven't done much because WWE creative has actually been normal to say above average good lately. There isn't a lot of like scrutiny as to like, who's writing this shit. When it was just Vince, you like, who are these jokers on this creative team that's putting out this product?
yeah.
Well, now no one's questioning it because the product's
Yeah.
fine. There isn't a lot to
And
investigate.
even Monday with Vince there because they were in Connecticut and being more involved in the creative process than he has been recently, I thought it was a really good show. So they seem to have hit their stride, I think. And
The reports out of Monday were that Vince changed some things. He made a lot of adjustments. He made changes to better show his vision of what he envisioned the product to be. The report went on to say that kind of at this stage, the Band-Aids ripped off. Talent kind of knows the deal, and there's some that probably like it, and there's some that don't like it, but they understand what it is, and they're just
Austin Theory likes it, and then
right. So yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot less tumult going on in the locker room because Triple H probably has enough of a hold on it that Vince, and if Vince isn't ripping stuff up at 7:55,
right,
then you can't complain. You can't complain that much.
To go back to the Regal point, I think like what is his role long term? I think one reason why it's probably not entirely certain, just like it isn't entirely certain for a lot of people, is that as they continue to work out the final particulars vis-a-vis Endeavor, I think there's an open question about like, okay, how many of these positions are even going to exist? In other words, some of these slots may simply disappear because of redundancies. There may be people, for example, on not necessarily Regal's position per se, because that's very focused on wrestling and on-screen content and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of these positions, they might still be figuring out like, are we even going to have this WWE position anymore, or is it going to be sort of a combination position, and maybe somebody on the UFC side is going to occupy it?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably why, not why he hasn't appeared on screen yet. I think it's what we talked about a minute ago. But I think determining kind of what his role is long term is probably intertwined with figuring out exactly what the full leadership and / creative and behind the scenes structure looks like.
Yeah.
But if, to answer your question more directly, I would say if Triple H has his way, William Regal would be someone who is in many ways comparable to a Bruce Pritchard. The difference would be, I think, he would want Regal more involved in like the actual like talent evaluation and development piece.
Yeah.
Whereas Pritchard was more of a purely creative type force. So, but yes, I do think if it's up to Triple H, William Regal basically has a job for life there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, we're going to switch topics. Since we met last, they had the big reveal. Roman was giving his new title. It's like basically the 7th generation of that same belt with just a different back color. Hot take alert. I like Seth's title as it is right now. I like Seth's title better than Roman's title. You know, when Roman held both of them, the red and the blue, like, yeah, those had some pros and cons, or I guess it was a black and a red. The pros and cons, okay, 2 titles look good with him.
Black and blue. Yeah,
black and blue. That style was fine. I really like the look of Seth's title. It's not the greatest one I've ever seen, but it's, we talked about it. It's got some familiarity to the big gold belt, and it's a little bit more of a classic look. I was waiting for some redesigned title that kind of fit, not necessarily like the Brahma Bull title that the Rock had, or the Rattlesnake belt, or the Rated R spinner. I didn't need a Roman brand belt, but I thought the color combination would be a little more representative of Roman. Maybe kind of what's like a more of like a machine gun silver or black, or whether gun polished metal, those sort of things. Maybe matted black could have been a good look. Instead, you get the exact same title, just with a yellow and red background, almost Hogan-ish. That red sort of the line underneath the W, and it's yellow. Major disappointment from a collector. There's no way I would fork over money even for a knockoff one on eBay for that title. It's just another version of what we've seen for years. Why didn't they come out with something like that? They let Roman design or something like that. It would have looked great.
A few thoughts on it. One is I do think it is a better looking belt than either of the individually than either of the two that it's replacing. Or again, we get into this complicated conversation about like, is it replacing? Is it, what's happening?
Right.
But I do think it looks, it's a better version of that. But to your point, it's the same design. I wouldn't need like Roman to design it himself. I'm fine with it not being like an individual specific title.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would have liked to have seen is a belt design that was, first of all, slightly larger, to sort of emblematic of the fact that it is 2 titles, or unifying 2 titles.
It's universal, Yeah,
can
be defended in any galaxy, on any planet, at any time. Right.
Right. And I think, again, to the point you made before, I think like Seth's belt, if you were to put the 2 belts like side by side or superimpose one over the other, physically larger, at least the main plate is physically larger than Roman's title.
Seems
which
like
I'm like, it should be at least as Roman should be at least as big, if not bigger. And then the other thing that was kind of interesting to me, I think I need to double check this, but I think if I saw it correctly, that it actually now says the word undisputed on the title.
Yeah.
Which, again, this is me being a nerd, drives me crazy. It's
you just had a tournament to make that title very disputed.
Correct. So you're saying, like, after you've crowned this new champion, gone to all this trouble for weeks,
oh my god, yeah,
you now create a new design that actually enshrines the word undisputed on the other title? That makes no sense. Why would they do that? That was the thing that bugged me.
If you were honestly sticking to a hard brand split, I'm not saying it would be okay, but like you could weave me that tale about an undisputed because it's separate.
Yeah.
But Seth is facing Damian Priest on SmackDown in a couple of weeks. I'm not saying they're throwing the brand split out the window, but I did want to get to that too. That
he's facing Damian Priest again.
He's facing Damian Priest again. It's going to be at MSG.
Oh,
on a SmackDown. So like, yeah, I get it, but like, you've got plenty of things you could do to main event a SmackDown without. But if you're at MSG, which is sort of their home, why wouldn't you have the outside of Roman, the top guy in the company, Seth Rollins? There are a few things that if you're a fan and are attending a WWE live event and say Roman's not there are only two things you want to do. You want to boo Dom Mysterio when they hand him the microphone,
of course,
and you want to sing Seth's song. Maybe short. You also want to kind of scream with Cody when he has his crescendo of his intro song, but he's everywhere, so you're getting that. But yeah, I mean, I get it, but like, they never said it was a Raw exclusive, title, but come on, you're already throwing brands out the window this soon after it.
This is what I always say, and it's not just about WWE. It's about any form of creative storytelling entertainment. You can make whatever rules you want, and I will, I may eventually say like this is dumb or like I don't like the way the story's going, but I'll go along for the ride. Like you say, okay, whatever your rules are. But what you can't do is you can't contradict your own rules or do stuff that doesn't make sense based on the rules that you yourself set up. So if you have a draft and you have a brand split and you have this other world championship that you've created, you can't then say like, okay, and now that world championship is going to be defended on the other show, even though it's two Raw superstars. Okay, that's okay. And then, oh, by the way, this other championship we're going to put the word undisputed on it. It's like that makes no sense. It's your rules. You made it up, but just stick to what you have created. Please.
I think WWE is happy that we are talking about that because it takes away from us talking about why the Raw Women's Champions on SmackDown, SmackDown Women's Champions on Raw.
Yeah.
Every week that goes by, I'm convinced they're just like, no one notices.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the only time that I think about it is when I get confused about which women are on which brand because it'll be like Asuka is feuding or just finished feuding with Bianca Belair over the Raw Women's Champion, and then I have to stop and think of like, oh no, Asuka's on. They're both on SmackDown, even though they just feuded over the Raw title.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it gets confusing for me. So, but yeah, so I don't like. I thought a month ago that the big confusion or the big topic of discussion about these championships was going to be like the lineage. Like, okay, so the Universal title is just kind of that's going away. I assume this is the WWE title. Essentially, it's carrying that lineage primarily, and now it's just like it's even more confusing. I don't get it.
Who knows? I mean, did you watch Seth and Damian on Monday? They had a banger. Great match.
And that's going to be a really, again, we talked about this, I think, I can't remember if we said it on the show or just in the chat, but both shows clearly to me are set up with the rosters they have now to be better shows.
Yeah.
Like talk about whatever you want as far as like who has more superstars or whatever, but both shows now are structured with a good mix of people who are going to make those television programs as TV shows more entertaining from a story standpoint. Concerns about like belts aside, I think the storylines are really good. We obviously the bloodline speaks for itself, but then you also have a really interesting story here with Seth, and then Finn is kind of in the mix, and there's that long history there with the original Universal Championship, and then Damian seems to be turning face slowly but surely. So what significance does that have vis-a-vis the Judgment Day? Is he going to get kicked out of the group, or were they going to keep going with this? I don't know, but I really like. So for all of the, as well as they have done with the Judgment Day, in terms of building them as bigger stars, I think that they've been lacking in terms of like a really good story. This is the first time I felt like, obviously Rhea has been pushed exceptionally well and is becoming a really big star. Dom is, as discussed. But I think that like in terms of a story, like their story was they just kept losing the Edge for like 9 months or whatever it was, and then
they threw him out, turned on him, beat him up, and then lost for 6 months.
Yeah, they just got beaten by him repeatedly, except for that one I Quit match. And that was kind of like, okay, well they're all good. They're good wrestlers, so that's fine. But the story is kind of lacking here. This is the first time where I think there really is something interesting here, purely from a story standpoint. So I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, and on Raw, there's any number of factions they can, get themselves involved with. If they do slowly want to do a face tease with some of them, Imperium is looking like a formidable force in Raw that's going to, as discussed, Gunther's going to hold that Intercontinental title for a good long while. And Imperium will be tag title challengers for a while. So yeah, lots of good things on that product. So we'll get to the last few things here. If you had the opportunity to see a live event, would you prefer it be a Raw live event or a SmackDown live event?
That's a great question. I would probably say Raw. The caveat being, at a SmackDown live event, that Roman probably won't be there. So although it would be fun to see, Solo or whoever, the fact that at a Raw live event you're going to get Dom, you're going to probably get Cody, you're going to get Gunther.
Cody will stay on the road even with his broken arm. I mean, he's not going to be, we'll still do that. Right?
He's a trooper. He perseveres, overcomes adversity. That's really his story. But you're going to get Judgment Day. So you're going to get, Rhea and Dom and, Finn and Damian Priest. I think it's Raw because again, like seeing, I have not seen Gunther in person. I would really like to. That would be a fun one.
Yeah.
And I think that between, put it this way, even though I completely think that SmackDown has the more sort of prominent roster, on a Raw live event, you're more likely to see a world championship defended. You're more likely to see all of their top stars present and accounted for. And going in, as you alluded to earlier, you have several different things that are going to be super hot crowd reactions for different, elements of the show. SmackDown would be great, but just the fact that going in that they're the star in the industry is almost certainly not going to be there unless it's like an MSG live show.
Right.
Probably would put me on the Raw side of the ledger.
When Bray Wyatt's back on the SmackDown roster, does that influence your decision? It should.
I mean, it goes without saying, of course.
We're days, if not minutes, away from his return. So
I can't wait to see. I say this all the time, but I think to myself when I'm watching WWE, even if I'm enjoying the show, I'm like, sure, this bloodline stuff is really interesting, but what I'm really wondering is, what is Uncle Howdy going to do next? That's what's in the back of my mind.
I would go because I want to see the QR code. I want to see somebody in a rabbit costume running around. Yeah, good times. I miss those days. One day there's going to be a book, whether Bray writes it, whether Bo writes it. As to how if you were his. Someone's got to explain this eventually. I hope there's an investigative journalist who's going to figure this out. Maybe he's just hurt. Maybe he's just hurt. Or they just realized it's too weird. It's just too weird, and it doesn't help Bray anymore because this last run really didn't work. As much as I wanted it to, as much as I loved it, as much as it started out exciting, it really didn't work. Maybe it was injuries. Maybe it was, who knows what it was, but that, maybe LA Knight was the wrong guy, as it turns out. That one match was horrible, and maybe it was just too much.
I have to say, I don't think that match was the fault of LA Knight. I think that the crazy stuff that they did with it was just, I don't know.
Do you imagine, like, they made that decision to take Mountain Dew's money with where weeks later they were getting Saudi Live Golf investment money? Who knows?
By the way,
yeah, let's get into it. How about
the fact that everybody was freaking out because there was a rumor that Vince McMahon was maybe going to get into bed with the Saudis, like beyond like a show here and there. And people were freaking out. Like they had to have an all staff, like all roster meeting and all this stuff. And like the internet was freaking out. It's like, and it winds up being like not true. And they go, they just do a deal with Endeavor, whatever, UFC. And the PGA, which from the highest mountaintop talked about how they could not compromise their morals, and like they condemn the players who left, who damaging their legacies. And then the second that the Saudis are like, what if we gave you guys $20 billion? They're like, done and done. Sure thing.
Unbelievable. If
the
we had
biggest hypocrites I've ever, just the worst.
They're so hypocritical. And, kudos to that guy Monahan. Like, at least he stood up there and took it, because I mean, seriously, what else are you going to do? Like, what else can you do?
It's funny because I heard, by the way, if you're just tuning in, this is golf talk.
This is golf chat with friends.
That's right. I heard, but it does connect because of the WWE history.
Absolutely.
But, I listened to Rich Eisen talk to a guy, a CNBC reporter today about it, and he was reading between the lines, but like parsing the conversation. What the CNBC reporter explained was the Saudis are very savvy when it comes to like understanding that there's negative PR. And so basically, like bottom line, the Saudis are buying the PGA.
Yeah.
Period. The thing that they're doing though is they're creating this other entity where they're saying like a majority of the seats on the board, a majority of the decision making is going to be occupied by current PGA officials. So technically, it's like the old PGA will still have the controlling sort of like creative control, to use a wrestling term.
Right.
But the reality is like all of the financial side of it is flowing to and from Saudi Arabia. So it's like, how crazy is that?
$690 billion gets you whatever you want.
It's just nuts that here's what's crazy about it to me, and then we can wrap up with wrestling. But the crazy thing about it to me is the PGA, it's not like the PGA is this sort of struggling, like they are the dominant brand it's funny because this is all the stuff that people were afraid of with WWE.
Yeah.
The idea was like WWE is the number one wrestling brand in the world, no question. But the Saudis have so much money that they could come in and be like, we know you're number one. That's why we want to give you like this giant bag of cash. And guess what? Everybody gets to walk away with it. You guys get insane money beyond your wildest dreams. We get this established brand that we really want. And everybody was really scared that was going to happen with WWE, and it didn't. And now the PGA, which again they are the dominant brand in golf. I mean, They're it. They are the number one golf brand for sure in the world. There's nothing even close. It's like WWE. And for them to be like, after talking about legacy and talking about how, the players who didn't go to live or how the players who did go to live were tarnishing their legacies, et cetera, after doing that for a year and a half, they're like, you know what? It's just so much money and we like money. We're going to take it. Even though we're all already super rich, like we're going to take this money, and that's the way it is.
And we'll tell the public, we'll come out looking like we're altruistic, saying that money going into golf, no matter where it comes from, is a good thing. They want to invest in golf, and we just want to grow the sport because so many people love playing it. So many people have the opportunity to play with more money. And
I mean, my question, if I had one question for the PGA Commissioner, it would be very simple. Are you lying now, or were you lying a year ago?
Yeah,
because fair. It's got to be one or the other.
Right.
These are two mutually inconsistent, completely mutually exclusive positions. And it's like, if you say, like, I wouldn't agree with it, but I would at least respect it if Monahan was like, look, as Ted DiBiase said, every man's got a price. And look, we said all that stuff, and when we said it a year ago, we meant it. But man, oh man, there's a lot of zeros on this check. And it was enough. Yep. And I'd be like, you know what? Again, don't agree with it, but I appreciate the honesty. That reason, at least, I accept. Accept the truth of it.
Right.
But like, for them to just pretend like, you know what? Even though we were engaged in like multiple lawsuits across both ways, we sat down and thought about it. We realized it was just about growing the game. Oh, what an epiphany!
Amazing.
It just happened to come with a multi-billion-dollar check.
Multi-billions. Everybody rich. That's right. We are going to turn it back to wrestling for the final. My final thought for wrestling this week is this. WWE, we've been saying it for weeks, they appear to be hitting on all cylinders. They did a monster number on Friday for SmackDown. It ended up being like 2.55 million, 2.6 million. That's as big an audience as they get these days. And they have some hot storylines. They've gotten their acts together. We've talked about their brands. Each brand is strong right now. Really dynamic characters. They're incorporating new talent. They're getting a lot of talent back. The Roman bloodline storyline is now sort of a self-contained unit, and it's going to be, people are salivating to see what the Usos are going to do, what's Solo going to do, what's Roman going to do. It's great. Not saying they need to be concerned, but on the other channel, and mostly I'm glad there is another channel. Thank God. I'm glad that there's other things to watch on TV, on streaming when it comes to wrestling. AEW is about to sort of hit their sweet spot of their season. They're starting to advertise for Forbidden Door 2. They've already announced 2, as far as the wrestling world goes, enormous matches. Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay for the New Japan US title that Kenny holds. That's the rubber match. They've wrestled in Japan, which is sort of both their homes. They've wrestled in America, and now they'll be wrestling in London, which is Will Ospreay's home. That's going to be exciting. Okada and Bryan Danielson. This is a match to who is the best, greatest on the planet. There's going to be a lot more matches they're announcing. And they're about to get, whether you like it or not, one of the largest names in the wrestling business in the last 20 years is about to return and be the focal point of a brand new show. Yet to be seen what sort of impact CM Punk's going to make. I mean, he has filled out the United Center in Chicago for the debut, obviously, but there are lots of reports that he's not really moving the needle in some of those other collision markets. Who knows what's true, what's not true as of yet, but people could find those numbers. But AEW's got a couple of really big wrestling events coming up. And I'm not saying WWE needs to be scared, but couple of bad shows, a couple of average Raws, nothing really happens with, someone something kind of non-exciting happens at Money in the Bank. Some rando wins it. It doesn't quite reach the fans. Wrestling's a fickle business, man. It could swing. Not going to swing drastically, but WWE needs to sort of still remain focused, because I think AEW is going to kind of hopefully not just knock one with as far as All Out, as far as Wembley, but with Punk too. They're about to have two big home runs. I mean, I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you'd say if WWE has no reason to be worried, but like they can't hit cruise control right now. They can't go into neutral and just coast, right?
So I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. One is I agree. I said this a few weeks ago. I think AEW, from a business standpoint, is in a position to be on as firm a footing as they maybe have ever been, like by the end of this summer. And I think there's a couple of things, a couple of reasons for that. One is I think a brand split for them is going to be hugely helpful. And I think that you've already seen, like, even putting the Punk return aside, which obviously is a plus, I think that just seeing how they're kind of dividing the roster illustrates the problem that the brand split is solving, because you're seeing guys like I was not Miro. What's this? Miro? Yeah, Miro.
Miro.
Okay.
Yeah, not Rusev, Miro.
Not Rusev, Miro. Yeah. So Miro and Thunder Rosa and Andrade and guys like that who have, for whatever reason, not been utilized on TV. Now they've got a new home where they can, again, kind of reestablish themselves. And not only reestablish themselves, but people who are known stars who haven't been featured lately and who there's an appetite to see them again. So there's that stuff. Plus, you mix in other people like the House of Black who are, obviously doing well. So that's a good thing from a TV product standpoint, because I think one of the knocks on AEW, and I've said it, is that they have this issue where, aside from the EVPs and people who are EVP adjacent, they really do have like really a significant portion of their talent who are stars or who are getting over, who whatever. And then all of a sudden they just disappear for 3 weeks. Yeah. And it's like, wait, what's going on? Like, why isn't Rick Starks on TV anymore? Or what happened to Powerhouse Hobbs? Like whoever or Hook or whoever the case may be. It's weird that I just need like the entirety of Team Taz, but it's other people too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of thing where I think that with a brand split, that is going to become a much, much less significant challenge. That's one good thing. Week-to-week television, which I think is where WWE has really improved over the last several months, I think that is also likewise going to improve with AEW. AEW is always putting on good matches, but the sort of the week-to-week storytelling outside of the orbit of the EVPs has not been great. So that's one thing. Two, the fact that they're establishing themselves in markets like the UK, I think that is tremendously positive.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've talked about, the ticket sales for Wembley are crazy. So that's all good. One thing that I think now that we have like a little bit of a sample size, as good as all that stuff I just talked about is for the overall brand of AEW moving forward, I think Forbidden Door is actually a negative in long term, because Forbidden Door is specifically something that I think not only does it appeal to sort of connoisseurs of pro wrestling,
for sure,
but more than that even is the problem that you have to divert resources in the short term to promote people who are not going to be part of your brand long term. So
and who most of the audience doesn't know in the first place.
Exactly right. So I think that it's, especially when they were first starting, it was sort of something that rising tide, raised all boats, because it's like, hey, this is beneficial for New Japan. It's beneficial for us because we're just starting out. I think now it becomes something where devoting TV time, weekly TV time in the lead up to Forbidden Door to like tell people like, oh, this guy is like a big deal in Japan, even though you haven't seen him much. Now it's okay for somebody like Takeshita, who is part of their like, that's fine. But like some of these other guys who like, hey, we're not going to see them at Forbidden Door. that to me, I think is probably not good for long term.
The resources you're spending to promote someone like Okada, who very well may be the best in the world and is famous in Japan. Sure. If you're doing it really to pop 14,000 AEW fans that are at home.
Amen. Amen. That's exactly the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so my point is
that pops the hell out of those 14,000. It's awesome.
It's the match is going to be great. We all know
absolutely,
it's going to be, and that's fine. But the problem is that if you look at the other stuff we talked about, like
how does it help Warner Discovery?
Correct. So if you look at the other stuff we talked about, like Collision, even bringing Punk back, the Wembley show, like all of that stuff are things that potentially could pay dividends 2 months, 6 months, a year from now.
Yeah.
Forbidden Door it's one and done. It's a bit of a novelty. And again, to wrestling connoisseurs or American fans of New Japan, it's awesome. It's great. It's dream matches. It's all that. I don't think, as you hit the nail on the head, from a long-term perspective or from a Warner Brothers Discovery perspective, it's at best neither here nor there, and maybe counterproductive.
Yeah, it probably is. I mean, AEW's ultimate goal right now is to try to get 1 million viewers on one of their random Wednesdays. Collision may do it, but it won't be doing it consistently.
And one other thing, to go back to the Collision thing. So what I have heard, and maybe you've heard this too, is I've heard the same thing you have, which is obviously the Chicago Punk advertised, that's going to be sold out. The subsequent shows on the Collision circuit are real. Like some of them are like have sold a few hundred tickets.
The one you keep seeing is the Hamilton, Ontario that sold 700 tickets. But like, how big is Hamilton, Ontario?
Well,
I'm sure it's big.
But this is what I've heard is part of the problem. Apparently, they don't get. I guess it's going to be on TNT. Like in Canada, they're not going to get Collision. Like it's not going to be on TV there. So I think that is part of supposedly part of the problem of why they're not selling tickets. It's like we want to see these people, and we're into the Owen Hart tournament or whatever, but these people are now with the brand split are not going to be even appearing on our TVs.
That's interesting.
So I think that's creating an issue.
It certainly is. Like we say every week, when it happens in wrestling on Mondays, on Tuesdays, on Wednesdays, on Fridays, on Saturdays, we'll be here once or twice a week to talk about it. Friends who are out there, tell your friends about us. Follow us, join us. We got a lot of exciting things coming this summer. I'm not going to tease everything, but the producer, Mark, and I have been talking about some things. We might have some special guests, some new people joining in to talk some wrestling once in a while. The wheels are turning behind the scenes at WCWF and the Family Podcast Network. So thanks to Cheats Behind the Booth producing tonight. Tom, thank you. I hope Dom wins Money in the Bank because I want to see the enjoyment on your face.
Oh, I'll enjoy it.
We will be here next Tuesday. We're tapping out. That's all we got tonight. Thank you again. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mark. We'll see you guys next week.